Well, hello there, everyone. Here, show you right here, top lane for first vote president, and you see right here is that this activity right here talks about right here for presidents of the United States and for Barack Obama right here, and I would paint this picture as like if he were young and he looks almost like maybe like a basketball coach right here, and I know that if anybody were like wanted to or while you were painting him, if you want to make him look like if he was an actual coach, if he was like a leader to like a basketball or a football team before he became president. But you see right here is that this your painting I want to put together right here using Illustrator right here. Yeah, right here is the different color, like the different painting tools as on illustration that they have these menus right here on the control panel. But for like my study about it's like for digital design especially is that think about any paintings that I could actually work with and create just if it's going to be based on any type of work based on like maybe websites or if it's going to be any other type of design, especially using a variety of tools. And I know like with any designers that they're like wanting to where that if they're going to be putting together some work and then they're like wanting to where that for anything that they you'll begin with and then thinking about that really and like if art is all about what you call it just one thing or if it's about maybe a variety and if you're going to be working with the painting, that some that may say is to just display it on a wall or anything like that, and then until people look at it and they tell you what they think, or if there's more that could be done with the work, just to present it as well. But for many years that I kept thinking about if anybody wanted to where this was like a history project and think about that if you would actually do some artwork based on the president or if it was what you call the king or something like that or anything like that, anything about maybe Egypt or something like the Egyptians or maybe the Indians, but still, that any type of artwork that I kept thinking about, I'm like, really, that people would probably think is that, they like seeing some talented artwork and then they would maybe display it, but then sometimes you're like, warrant or, well, is it going to be published or not? But anyway, published or where other people would be able to get prints or anything like that or display it any other type of way. But this way right here is talked about for the first vote president. And I can remember that this is what President Obama this would be about close to about what he would look like back then. So if anybody will warrant or that back then that he would have had like was like he would have been a little younger, so he would have like besides the darker hair. But anyway, but this right here would be a like for like for President Obama that I can remember that people were probably thinking is that you may have heard that on the news to or anybody who's going to be a registered voter that they would more likely say is that hey that being a registered voter that if possibly that if President Obama is to be elected for president, to being averse to, he would be the it's like any phone calls or anything like that or anything radio broadcasters or anything like that, and that you're like warrant or that that from back in 2008 whenever he was going to be elected the first African American president, and of course for the first vote for me was going to be biased to where that was not the very first vote, but whenever I did become a registered voter, that would have been about 11 years ago, something like that, whenever I first registered, and I can remember that that any candidates that you wanted to vote for, the chances of them winning may be about less than perfect, but still that going out to vote and then thinking about for really anybody that may want to, or just think about those candidates that the Secretary of Treasury, anybody that you may have voted for, may have lost a campaign. So they may have lost lost the election, or they may have lost the vote, and so you think sometimes it seems like to where you go out and vote, and it seems like 15 minutes of your time, and that's it. Well, thanks for participating. But really, about what do we usually think about is to where that for the first vote, and think about just kind of looking back at the past 7 years, whenever President Obama was president. That I don't really think necessarily to where that the things that maybe he promised and the things that he did not promise, but really about is to where from where I was and from based on the country especially. So he may not have been able to cut taxes, each and every time, but let's just say that on average, other people that may think as to where that, yeah, that during the time that he was president, that some things that he said he was going to do, and which I know that one of those things was is captures like beside it's like Osama bin Laden, but then other taking care of other terrorists as well as it's like if it's going to be freedom for our nations and job creations. And I know that like with anybody who's going to be what you call wanting to run for president, that they may come up with a big list of maybe 100 or so assignments. It's like one of those one of those what you call agendas will be is to where one of those things that he said that he was going to do was taking care of Osama bin Laden and then ending the wars that were going on. So that's just a thing though by the United States of America that whenever a president that takes the leader for commander in chief, they may realize about our American our national security, that the Americans, the soldiers that were overseas, fighting for our country. It's like fighting for our country as of right now, and I think it is to where yeah that maybe not all Americans are going to be what's called just here in the United States of America, but then they could also be in different say continents, like different parts of the world as well. One of those was like the Iraq, and then as well as that there was another country also that Al Qaeda. I think Al Qaeda was in Afghanistan. So that's just the thing that other countries that are U.S. U.S. Army, if it's going to be that I don't know about the Marines, but anyway, about our national security, that about the soldiers, that for our, I guess if you want to call our troops that are sent to other countries just to make sure that the American people are safe. But that's just the thing about education, and then as well as like for renewable energy sources. And I know, like with anybody, that they may warrant to where that whenever you first voted for President Obama, did you necessarily think about as to where, oh, he was the first black president? There's something about maybe his skin, or maybe the fact about that yeah, something else about maybe about his education. And I know that whenever I first was thinking about as to where that, yeah, whenever I was first thinking about voting, and then that would have probably been about as early as February of 2008, whenever I seen that those political commercials for candidates. And I can remember that the very first speech I can remember that President Obama gave way before he was elected for president, that he was talking about I don't even have that commercial, of course, on recording, but let's just say that whenever he was talking, that he was saying about us to or something about the American people, and as well as knowing about us, like we need to say for freedom for America. So he was mentioning about something about yeah, that what job creations, if I can remember right, that it's like something that's like for other than that you're on your own, other than that for knowing about Martian nations for the United States of America. But he said a few things which I know that watching those commercials during that time, and I don't know really what they were related to, but I can remember that before that I knew that President Obama, which caused like before he was even on the ballot, that I can remember seeing a lot of those political commercials, and you're like warren toward who do you think should be able to be who do you think should be elected for president? And I know I mentioned before as to where like for President Obama that I looked at him as like if I may mention before is like I think Dwayne Johnson. I'm like I looked at him as The Rock. It's like somebody who was a wrestler at one time, and and then now he wants to run for president. So and then I know that seems like a if I that seems like kind of like a silly thing to say, because that we all know is like anybody who wants to run for president, that they would never what you call it, maybe when you call one of these championships at leaders, or from a basketball or football team, or coached a football team, or maybe if they were a professional wrestler or anybody like that. Somebody with a lot of muscle and somebody that knows about, for who to stand for, who's the leader. But on the other hand, that this right here will be some of my work right here, and I'm on put this. I'll be doing some more work here and putting it up on my Behance page also, just to say it's like, yeah, for presidents of the United States. And if anybody will want to, or this, be doing some more work, illustration work, like history about presidents. If it's going to be about President Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan, or if it's going to be about Kennedy and President Kennedy. So the past presidents, which I know that they were probably before my time, from back in the early 1970s, Jimmy Carter, that President Carter, the past presidents, but still that top, I say, for the American history too, about the presidents. And I know that like with any president, that whenever I went to go vote, for president, vote for Barack Obama, that I can remember, besides those commercial ads or so, I known about for who's going to be elected for president for 2016. But I can remember that I did have a goal set, which I know I may have mentioned this before, about the goal set is to work on my driver's license, because I've been working a long time for a driver's license. It's like, talk about for a driver's license though, but you see right here is that talk about for first vote president. And I know, like with anybody, that if they're going to be warned, or that that whenever you're going to be working on your driver's license, that you spend about maybe 4.5, 5 years working on the driver's license, and then by the time that you know that you're pretty close to getting the driver's license. And by the time I got it, I can remember that it was about that was about a week earlier, that before the final vote, before the November election. I can remember that whenever I finally passed the test, and then I was able to drive to my polling location. And I know, like with anybody, that that whenever you go out and vote, that if you're going to have to drive quite a bit of distance, just to be able to go out and vote for who do you think should run for president, and who you think should be elected for Secretary of the Treasury. But on the other hand, as you see right here, are this painting right here. I like what I talk about, for example, right here with the president. And if anybody will want to, or you add a little bit of color, but I'm like, well, really, I don't really see no need at at this time. But anyway, but you see right here is like talk about for like driver's license though, that I can remember going out and driving around, going out to the polling place. And if anybody will want to, or whenever you first get your driver's license, what are the places that you would go first whenever you finally pass the driver's test and finally got a driver's license? Because I know I already had a card just for special training. So it's like if it's driving skills training, and I know that with most of the time that the president will probably say that, licensed driver to be with you until you pass the driver's test, which I did. So that was just a thing, as to where if anybody would probably say about the president, would probably think about the American people, that if they go through any traumatic ordeals, that they may think that well, you're on your own or so, or hey, that that's something that if you're only there's only a team of about maybe 3 members or so on your team, well, that's something you got to work out. But the way I think about those, like for presidents of the United States, that for like President Obama, that I know that a lot of times that he's like, whenever you're president, that you may think as to where that that you get quite a bit, if you try to get used to the fact about people who were what you call dealing with a lot of traumatic ordeals, if it's about job loss, or if it's about like homes, or if it's about business, like anything about maybe health insurance, or anything anything that maybe the Republicans would not like. And then it's like you're trying to get the Democrats to agree on a certain pass of a bill or something like that. But anyway, but whenever I first went out to go vote, I can remember that the polling location was pretty complicated to find. But I can remember President Obama, that hearing his voice on those political calls, and if anybody will warrant, or that hi, this is President, this is Barack Obama. Today is election day, and you had the power to make the change we need in this country. So I need you to go out and vote today. I can't do it myself. And I can remember that he spoke over there at the University of Missouri. So if anybody will warrant where, yeah, you're going to have a candidate who maybe went to a college, maybe in Chicago, or maybe at Des Moines, Iowa, or maybe if it was part of, if it was anything about, somewhere, maybe out there in, maybe parts of Washington, or if it was anything about, Phoenix, Arizona, or any state like that, that they may have attended a school or university out there, gotten their law degree, somewhere out there, and think about it to where that they go to a certain school. So if anybody warrants to any candidate that you want to vote for, and some may say, yeah, well, they went to the University of Missouri, or that they, were a student over there at in Chicago, or maybe part of New York, or if they would have gone to a certain school, and that people it may say is to where they're going to go ahead and vote for this person just because they went to the school, they went to our school, and we want to support them, all what we can. And on their hand too is to where if anybody will warrant toward yeah, that about the president, that they'll say that that one reason to why you want to vote for President Obama other than John McCain, or if it's going to be any other candidate especially. But the way I think about that with most, like with any politics, is that whenever you vote for a certain candidate, that my first time going out and voting and actually hearing that president, the person, the governor that actually won, it's like made me feel like just to where that what I kind of I called it the good year. And I can go ahead and write this right here. I'm like, if anybody warrant, or yeah, that I call that the good year. What was the reason why I call it the good year? Because a lot of good a lot of the good things that were going, like talk about, say, for I set a goal, and then by the time a lot of those goals are achieved especially. So I know ever since I passed the driver's test, I can tell anybody that ever since I passed the driver's test, you were kind of like, well, hey, that you said that at the beginning that you weren't going to do this or you weren't going to do that. But anyway, I don't know if we can see this right here, but anyway, go ahead and change this right here to the blue, so that way we can see it. But anyway, the good year. But anyway, but talk about for first vote president, and I know that for who's going to be winning. If to try to see about who's going to be winning the November election for 2016, and like with anybody that they may warrant, or yeah, if it's going to be what you call, if it's going to be Donald Trump, or if it's going to be Hillary Clinton. But on your hand, that for any any candidate who wants to it's like run for president, and at the time I like warrant, or really that for anybody who's going to be running for president, and think about those American people, is that for a lot of times that back whenever I was young, now I can remember that ever since I was in the fourth grade, I can remember that they had the polling places even over there at the schools. Polling places, I guess, are not just located in like maybe certain maybe the churches, or if it's going to be maybe this public schools, Catholic schools, or if it's any schools like that. A lot of times I would probably say that they are not, they may not all be located in the schools, that they could maybe be located in certain offices or so. So you're like Warren Tour. And I can remember back before I was even a registered voter, I can remember that they had a number of offices open, on election time, that certain areas of the school that I can remember I could not walk into, because I can remember seeing a lot of those polls, and you're like Warren Tour. I kept thinking about where are those, but if anybody like, and I can remember that the teachers, if I can remember right, the teacher said something about during that time that I asked, that it was like, hey, that yeah, that was, it's something about going on about that, yeah, that they need a, during that time that they said that there was something about going on at that school. I think they had something to do with the newscast or something. If I can remember right, that yeah, I didn't quite understand it, but until I was 18, and I didn't quite understand about what all that election stuff was all about. So if anybody will warrant toward it, yeah, talk about the State of Union address, that whenever the president makes a speech, and I can remember that the first thing, it was not President Obama, it was George W. Bush, who was president during that time, that I can remember that whenever he gave the State of the Union speech, that would have been about from back in 2007, I think it was, or maybe 2006. So, back in 2006, whenever he gave the State of the Union address, and he was talking about September 11th, and then talk about ways of to try to prevent an air attack, and then the other one was about the cure. Trying to find a cure, trying to find a cure for the diseases. And I know that like for every president, that I think that maybe that besides the internet security and the protection, I think that they need to also about the vaccines and the cure for the diseases and stuff. Like one of those is like HIV, or if it's going to be AIDS or cancer. So I know that the president, President Bush, during that time, he mentioned about something about the cure for AIDS, but about it for President Obama. So I know that 7 years, 7.5 years seems like a long time, really, to take care of everything. But if we would actually do the math, that you're talking about only about maybe if you want to call it like maybe 20 or so of like have so many speeches to where that for whatever he's anything that he's trying to get to first, until he's able to take care of the next agenda. But I guess if that requires a lot of research of working with the doctors and as well as the medical labs and what they find, especially. But on the other hand, and too, about anything else that they find in research, especially. But anything about vaccines or so. But really, I might talk about for people's lives, especially that they may think is toward it. A company that may go out of business if somebody else finds a new solution for a cure for a disease, but still, that if anybody wants toward it, that if I can remember right back in 2010, that whenever the swine flu was going around, I can remember the president was getting on live on air, and he was telling all the American people that for what they need to do about covering your mouth when you cough, and making sure that everybody's all safe and secure, so I can for healthy. But really that my first time going out to vote, to cast a vote, for president, for the vote for president, that I kept thinking about is toward that a number of things that I was thinking about, to pass the driver's test especially, and on the other hand, that knowing about for education especially. So if anybody wants toward that being a student, especially working on my art skills, and if anybody warns us toward it, that a number of things that you could be doing, and a number of things that I guess that you can maybe think about doing also, that I'm like wondering toward really that if anybody warns us toward, do you think that you would ever be in charge of what you call maybe like say for being a registered voter, being a registered to vote, does that all have anything to do with what you call the candidates who win or lose, or if it's about to where something that maybe you could be doing for what you call the nation especially. So if you're like wanting toward it, if you're going to have a driver's license, a valid driver's license, and then you're like wanting to where if it mainly contains information about you, or if it's like something that maybe you can do for the state, for the nation especially. But one of those things maybe could be used toward it really, that telling other people about for anything about for what represents for the United States of America, anything about job wise, about what you can do especially. So, and I know, like with anybody, that we may not think that the elections would cost any amount of money, but I'm like, well, with anything really, anything in particular, that especially those who work, like wanting to work, I'm sure it costs a lot of money, but then thinking about is to work that what type of professional does it require, a certain professional, or what you call that type of student, and any students like me that may warrant to work really that for voting for president, that give me the opportunity to where I can go ahead and speak for my own words as to where that I think that this person should be elected for president, just because that I read their history and knowing about that and I know, like with anybody, that they're like wanting to where the next president that we do have should be, it's like not a Muslim, or maybe what you call not an African American, when we may think about President Obama, he was the first black president. But then think about it with me though, I was what you call one of the first voters who voted for President Obama, the first president who won the election. So I usually look at it as to where the first time, or if it was the second time that you went out to go vote, and it was like the second time, but then the first time for me to actually hear about somebody that actually won the election. So whenever you hear about that, about somebody who won the election, and think about it as to where that before that they leave office, anything that they can do before they leave office, and I'm like wondering to where, yeah, that during that time I was working on a driver's license, but now it's like working on a college degree. So if anybody will wonder to where, yeah, your college degree in art, huh? I'm like, well, yeah, I guess. I don't know if it was my college degree in being an auto mechanic, then I guess what else could I say other than that what new models are being discovered to be manufactured. But if anybody warns us toward it, really that we've all heard that before, to where homes are made out of wood, right? I'm like, how often do we hear about homes are made out of steel or fiberglass or anything like that? I'm like, really, if you're going to be working on your college degree for any study, and you're like wondering toward that your homes, new energy sources made for homes especially, and it's something to reduce the risk for carbon monoxide and carbon pollution, as well as other energy resources to save the environment, as well as save the planet. So that's just the thing, is to where that I know with President Obama that he may mention before, is about as to where, yeah, well, I won both elections. I won both of those, but still that if anybody were like wondering to where that about the president, that whenever he speaks, and I know like with anybody that since you were young, that before I was even registered, before I was even old enough to really understand, before I was even old enough to vote, I can remember that President Clinton, if I can remember, he was president during the time, and President Ronald Reagan. So if anybody like wanted to, you hear this stuff on the news, but then they basically say is to where, yep, at the first answer you're going to hear is to where you're really too young to understand it, or is about the fact about, yeah, well, you need to be registered, just to be able to cast a vote, or if it was anything about as to where, you got to pass the test, you had to have the subject government. You had to take government class in high school just to be able to be a registered voter, or maybe that you had to watch a certain amount of hours of TV on Fox News or anything like that, just to be able to become a registered voter. So anything that we may have heard on the news from a while back, and you're like, you hear the president, you may see the president, but one of those things that I can remember about the president, like with any student, if it's having to go to school on a Saturday, or if it's anything about his tour, that you can't take the job just because it requires a certain degree of education. And it's like, that's what the president said. Like, and yeah, well, the president don't. I'm like, yeah. So we may have our own feedback. We may have our own discussions if you're going to be mad about, yeah, the president said that you can't take the job until you actually get a job or so. But let's just say that on average is that if you're going to be voting for president, and thinking that that you go out and cast a vote, and thinking about as to where if it's somebody that you want to be elected for president, or if it was anybody, say, yeah, 15 minutes of your time and then that's it, or if it's anything about, yeah, Vice President Joe Biden. But on the other hand, that if anybody were to ask, it's like, why is it that you did not vote for John McCain? But I'm like, well, really, that I guess I could probably say is that there was like a 20%. It's like to where that I saw that John McCain was going to be a pretty good candidate, but really that to be honest with anybody is to where that, yeah, that I really just think that President Obama, and I know that if anybody will warrant toward it, yeah, that if you can remember hearing those commercials from back then, is to where they said that he did not have any experience, as a leader. He did not have any experience at all being in charge of anything related to Congress or anything like that. But really, that I guess you could probably say is that about the president, he probably had like other parties that were helping him out, lead lean him to where for about for being president. And I know, like President Obama, that being a commander in chief was not really about the fact about being in the most famous house in America. Maybe people taking pictures, people want to do interviews with you, anything like that. So that's just the thing. Being president, I guess, is not just about what you call people watching you on TV. People want to see you speak about the nations. Yes, if it's going to be the state of the nation, or if it's anything like that, the state in the union, or if it's anything about speeches, talk about anything, updates about, for what goes on in America. So if anybody were like Warren, or anything about the elections, is that you say, yeah, this is an important day for America. Why is it the important day for America? Well, people, those who are registered voters, ask them as to where that, yeah, please take time to go out and vote. And so that's just a thing that, does that mean that you are automatically excused, during the whole day of whichever you're working on? And if anybody wanted to, well, I have a meeting at 2 o'clock. So the chances are me voting is toward maybe less than perfect, but still that they may say is that, well, if you have a meeting at 2 o'clock, you can go vote online too, or like it should only take about 15 minutes to go out and vote. And like with anybody, that if you're going to be voting for a certain candidate, and I know with me though that 7 months seems like a long time really to know about who you really want to vote for president, if it's going to be the Democratic Party or if it's going to be the Republican Party. And you're like Warren, to where people that may say is that vote for Republican or vote for Democrat, or if it's any other type of party, especially, but all the other parties. But so that's just a thing that looking at a lot of this history stuff, a lot of this voting stuff, and sometimes it's going to remind me from back in the 5th grade or maybe the 3rd grade is to where that, yeah, we were talking a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr. also, but then, another thing is like the Bio History Project is to where that, those who were president during that time, fight for the slaves, from the slaves that were freed, as well as the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. And so that's just the thing. Whenever a president is going to be in office, that that's just the thing, though, is to where that you're trying to get something done. It's like if it's going to be what you call it, you think about the American people that need to be helped, the ones who are not insured, the ones who are jobless, and think about that there's going to be a president that has to respond to a certain matter over an email or maybe a call, or maybe if it was anything about maybe terrorist attacks, or if it's anything about a war that's going on. And sometimes, like with any president, they may warrant or that, yeah, that if there was something that had to be taken care of before that they entered before that they were elected president, before that they even came up to into the White House, and you're like warrant to where that whenever you're watching that election stuff and think about it, to where that whoever's it's going to be elected for president. So it's basically, if anybody warrants to where that whenever a candidate's elected for president, it's basically to where a lot of the mess that happened, from nearly 10 years ago, that it's like, yeah, well, now that's your responsibility to take care of it, Mr. President. But really, that know about between the vice president as well as the Secretary of State. But on the other hand, that for anybody who's going to be a registered voter, first time going out to vote for president, first time going out to vote, that's just a thing, though, is to where if anybody warns to where, is this really a test? So if this was a test right here, and think about it's like for which one is the writing tool and which one's the shade tool, and you have right here, for these color swatches right here. So if anybody warns us to where, yeah, that you like to know about who's the artist right here. But the artist right here, and I'll go ahead and write right here, is like for for being a registered voter. Have right here is for me right here, and if anybody warrants to where, yeah, that got right there, me right there, and so go ahead and write right here. But if this was like maybe a test of some sort, and then have right here is like if anybody warrants to where, yeah, that President Barack Obama, and really about what do we think that his initials are necessarily, and I would say BOA for Barack Obama. Anyway, but there you have it. Talk about, say, for the initials right there. And then knowing about the stars, it represents you for like United States of America. And I know that I can remember hearing about that on TV as to where that yeah, that's like how well the president, President Obama, how well you sing the Star Spangled Banner. I say yeah, that like an O say, can you see? Like, but other than that know about right here is like for God bless America. But anyway, but they have a talk about for elections 2016 and see what happens about that. But anyway, but anybody like wanted to where that if we go out and go vote and want to know about who's going to be winning the elections and the first vote for president, and during the time since I was a student also, it's like even working also, if anybody warns us to it, that go ahead and do like an illustration painting. And I know if anybody will warrant to it, that you can maybe look at my work, even on Matthew 31 on screencast also. It's like it'll be Matthew 31 on screencast, and you will be able to look at some of my web designs also. And I'll think about as to where if I really want to do anything about maybe about the president or so, on there, or if it's anything about my profile as well on using Dreamweaver. But anyway, but there you have it. Talk about it for president. And I say for President of the United States of America, and along to for first vote president, apply for commander in chief. I say for important reasons for America. For those be registered to vote. It's like, yep, take a few minutes or so to go out and vote, and about let the country know about what you think, who you think that should be running for president, and apply for important day of America. But if anybody will warrant toward it, yeah, for important day for America, that I keep thinking of is like as a student is to where that really that is there a rule to where you have to postpone a bill just to go out and vote? And that seems like a question to where it seems like it all depends. But really, do you have the right to postpone a bill just because that you want to know about who's going to be our next commander in chief, or postpone an appointment, or postpone anything about maybe a meeting if it was anything important, and knowing about if it's something to do with the elections. It's like elections for who's going to be our next commander in chief. But other than that, the way I think about it, though, is like really that depend on the matter, but they would suggest is to where that you have all day to go ahead between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. to go to a local poll to be able to cast a vote. But then if you get really busy, then they could probably say is to where that, yeah, that if it's real important, and they would probably say that the chances are you could be excused also. But on your hand, they say really that don't mean forget it either. That please, everybody in the American people, that don't mean that you can forget it. That just basically means it's like, yeah, for elections, that like we say, you are excused just to attend the elections. But then on your hand, it's like, yeah, after the elections are over and knowing about for who's going to be which call next leader, our next Secretary of Treasury, it's like for our next Commander in Chief, and it's like for school boards or anything like that. But anyway, for first vote president, thanks for watching. Have a great day.